Hello everyone, this is chapter 14, word problems, graphing word problems, and graphing of data, the beginnings of that. So just a quick reminder from the last couple of days, just be careful and remember that when dealing with sine and cosine, as well as their reciprocal functions, which secant, cosecant, that the period, right, the period of those functions is 2 pi, typically. So when looking at any sort of transformed function, you're going to take 2 pi divided by b. When do you use period of pi, right, pi over b? Well, the two functions that you're going to use that for will be the other two trig functions, tan and cotan. So just be aware. Those kind of mistakes are pretty common, and obviously can mess up your sketch of your graph if plotted using the wrong period. Okay, so I'd like to get started with getting a function from some data. And how you go about doing this, there's a couple different ways to do it. Typically, I like to use the cosine function because the cosine function is nice. As you look at the cosine function, right, we know that the cosine function does something like this, right, where these two values, right, are 1, and your lower end value is -1. So then your amplitude is 1, your period is 2 pi, and everything's just dandy, right? So I want you to imagine using cosine, and when you use cosine, the two critical values that you want to look for, there's two maxes. All right, so I look at the data, and I try to find those maxes because I know a full period will go from max to max. So it looks like I see a max here, and I see that same value again here at 16. Okay, so I'm just going to do a quick sketch. It'll be pretty rough, but 4 and 16. Okay, so halfway in between there should be a minimum. Now, this doesn't always happen quite this nicely, but we do have a minimum value, and the minimum value right in between them at 10. So I would just put those points there just to kind of give myself a little reference. And basically what I want to do is I want to sketch those points. Right, so at 4 and at 16, right, I have a value of 13. Right? Same thing over here. And then at x equals 10, or t equals 10 in this case, right? And this isn't going to be drawn to scale, but I have a value of 11. So I can sketch a general cosine function. All right, not well done. Let's redo that. That's a little better. Okay, I've got a general cosine function, and I need to find some values, right? I need to find a, b, c, and d. Well, I can tell you right now that if I were to cut this graph in half, right, and find its baseline, or what I call the center of the graph, that'd be at 12. So I know d equals 12. Now, if it's kind of unclear what d would equal, I would take my max value plus my min value and divide it by 2. Okay, that'll get you your vertical shift, whether it's up or down, doesn't really matter. So in this case, my max value is 13. My min value is 11. Add those together, I get 24. Divide by 2, I get 12. Okay. Okay, so then let's backtrack here for a moment, and let's find a. Well, A is going to be the distance, right, from the baseline or the center of the graph to the max or to the min, either one of those. And we know in this case that that value is going to be 1. Right, so there's not going to be any sort of vertical stretch or shrink. Okay, but if I wanted to find that, right, a way I could do that, if it wasn't clear, is I'd take my max minus my min and divide by 2. All right, so in this case, I take 13 minus 11, divide by 2, and it's all good. Okay, so here's where things get a little interesting. To find b, well, first I got to find a period of the function. All right, so a period of the function would be 1 full cycle. The period of that function is 16 minus 4. So the period of the function in this case is 12. All right, so let's do some work over here. Period is given by period is given by 2 pi over b. Well, if 2 pi over b, move down here for a second, equals the period, then 2 pi over b equals 12. So to solve for b, I would cross multiply. And so I get 2 pi equals 12b. And then when I divide by 12, it looks like 2 pi over 12 gives me pi over 6. So b in this case equals pi over 6. Okay, now our last piece here, c. C is going to be the horizontal shift. So the reason I love cosine is because normally the first max is on the x-axis, right? We're used to seeing, some max value right here, and then the graph goes down like that, right? So if I have to shift my max from the x-axis over, it looks like to me I would take it from here to there. And so this number, this first value, is typically my shift, right? So it looks like I'm going to go right 4 units. And so now, you guys, I can sketch out my function. So f of x equals a times whichever function I'm using, in this case cosine, b, which I'm going to write pi over 6, and then we're going to use the variable t. If I'm going right 4, I'm going to subtract 4, and then I'm going to add 12. And there's our function. We've taken some data, we've fit it to a cosine function, and we can do some predictions based off of that. All right, I'm going to move on to the next slide. All right, I'm going to do one of these problems here. At this point, let me look at it here. I don't think I really care which one. I'll just do, let's go with 31. So let's get started on that. A couple of just absolute snipes right away. Someone is going to call this the amplitude, and they'll be very wrong. That is actually D. It's just in a different place, right? But I'm just adding that. So a vertical shift up 3. Looks like the amplitude is 2. Okay, so I get a 2 here. It doesn't look like I have a horizontal shift going on there. So I got a little bit of work to do. I've got 3 pi over 8 equal to b. Alright, so 3 pi over 8. I got a little bit of work to do here. I don't have a horizontal shift, so I don't have to worry about that at all. Let's go down here for a second. 2 pi divided by b equals the period. So let's do a little work here. If I divide by a fraction, that means I want to multiply by its reciprocal. Okay, so that times 2 pi, we would see a cancellation of the pi's, and it looks like we get a period of 16/3. That's quite gross. Okay, so I'm going to plot this out, and then I'll do the vertical shift in a moment. So 16 thirds. I'll go with, let's see here. This will be my first. Oh, I want to go out to 12. Gross. Okay, so let's think about this for a second. So if I want to go from 0 to 12, and one period is 0 to 16 thirds, this would be 0 to 36 thirds. Okay, so let's see, how many times would I do that? 16 thirds would be one period. Then after another 16 thirds at 32 thirds would be another period. And then it would look like I'd have another 4 thirds, which would be 1/4 of a cycle. So one cycle, 2 cycles, and 1/4 of another cycle. Okay, so we're going to have 2 and 1/4 cycles. Okay, so I need 2 and 1/4 cycles. So let's do this like this. Let's go, here's 16 thirds. So half of that would be 8 thirds. Half of that would be 4 thirds. So that's 4 thirds, 8 thirds, 12 thirds. Okay. Okay, so now let's look at our vertical shift for a moment. Got a vertical shift up 3. So let's put the center of the graph right here, just so we have a little reference point. Okay, this is 16 thirds, one period. Let's go out. Here's a 1/4, a 1/2, 3/4, and our other full period, 32 thirds. There's our second period. And then we'll go out one more 1/4. This should be 12 or 36 thirds. Okay, we're going to do a quick sketch here in a moment, but the amplitude looks to be 2. So our max value would be 2 above that. This is another way you can do this, you guys. I'm not going to ever limit you to the using a specific method. Okay, so I kind of have this runway, right? I have a cosine value, right? No, sine. I got a sine value. I have no horizontal shift. I've taken care of the vertical shift. I've taken care of the stretch. I've taken care of the change in period. So now all I really have to do is graph. So the sine value always starts on the x-axis at its at the center of its graph, and then goes up, back down to the center, down to the minimum, up to the center, then max, down to the center, then min, up to the center. So that should be 2 full cycles, which it looks like, and then 1/4 of another cycle. So let me highlight. Here's my first cycle. Bad. Here's my first cycle. Let's try that again. There we go. That's cycle number 1, ending at 16 thirds. Cycle number 2, ending at 32 thirds. And then cycle number 3, I'm going to go blue. A portion of cycle number 3. So ending at 12. There you go, guys. That's how you would do that. Of course, this tells us, right, tells us only graph between 0 and 12. On the next problem, it looks like it says t greater than 0, so it's basically telling you to go as far out as you possibly can within the confines of the space provided. All right, guys, that is graphing using data. Of course, this is more word problem-ish, although it's not at all. There was no word problem at all, but just a little bit more practice with amplitude, period, phase shift, and vertical shift. All right, any questions? More than welcome. See ya.